Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? Welcome to First Cut. This is another Korra recap. I am here with Mr. Paul Oyama. What is up, man?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking about one of my favorite shows. It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to get you on because I heard you were a Korra fan. You mentioned that a few times beforehand, so I was like, I have to get these Korra fans for different seasons. And then I pegged you for season 4. Hopefully you love season 4 as much as I do. I think for the most part, people agree that seasons 3 and 4 are actually really, really good, if not the best. You can debate which one's better, but I still feel like season 4 is a great season. There's a lot of good stuff to get into. But yeah, that's the first thing I want to ask you, man. How's your rewatch been? I was asking you before we came on.
Yeah, it's been good. So I actually was pretty late to the show because like Avatar is actually my favorite television show of all time. But I'd never seen Korra when it first came out. I think I'd seen some of the first season here and there. And then when I was in college, we ended up watching with a bunch of our friends. We watched Avatar all the way through again, and then we watched Korra all together. And then it was sort of this cool discovery period. And now with it sort of coming back into the consciousness, I decided to go rewatch it. I don't need to use the Netflix. I have this lovely Blu-ray copy of the entire series. But yeah, it's been great. My dad had never seen any of it, so I showed him Avatar, and he was really, really into it. So we kind of rolled right into Korra, and that's kind of how I got this recent rewatch going.
That's so interesting, right? Because I feel like a lot of people are going to have not the same experience as you did with the Blu-rays. Because considering I talked to Wendy about the whole idea of the way they released this, the whole Nickelodeon thing. I mean, I've been following this forever.
This season, especially this season, season 4.
Especially this season, right? But I follow this since the very beginning, obviously, because I'm much older than you. I was able to do the whole Avatar linear. And then once the first trailer, the idea of Korra, the announcement of the 70 years after Avatar Aang and this whole thing. But I feel like Nickelodeon has always struggled with the release structure when it comes to even now, if you realize when this finale was until now and how many people then, I'm like, oh, you got to watch Korra. And then everyone's like, how do I watch Korra? You have to like request a Blu-ray at your Best Buy and then wait for it to ship. Or you can order it on Amazon, but that's kind of it, right? There was no streaming way to watch it.
Well, no, it was when I watched the first time, it was on Amazon Prime for a long time. The whole series was on Amazon Prime. There you go.
So if you had Amazon Prime.
Yeah. And then I think they got taken off. So it was like one of those things where it's like I didn't end up going back to it immediately after, even though I really liked it. So it's interesting that it's got this new life, obviously, with Netflix doing the live action Avatar and then putting the first series on there and then rolling this onto right after. I think that it's really elevated in kind of the public consciousness, and now people are more aware of the two series.
Exactly. And I feel like, especially with Korra, right? Because everyone is like you said, Avatar, people consider it to be some of their best favorite shows of all time. But the Korra thing is still very split. So people are always like, oh, don't watch Korra. I don't care what anyone says. Don't watch it. And then a lot of people are like me are like, oh, you have to watch Korra. This is a show that I highly recommend all the time. So it's still very split when it comes to Korra, but I'm hoping that people now are kind of taking the decisions upon themselves because it's Netflix. So it's so much easier for people to just be like, I might as well watch it.
And they're short episodes. Like it's not like it's a big commitment. They're 22 minutes. So it's like you can get in and get out. Really quickly. You kind of know if you like it or not.
Yeah, that's what I was telling Sabrina because I recommended it to her. And I told her, I was like, if you skip the intros, it's like 18 minutes. So it's like such a breeze.
Don't skip the intros, though. The intros are amazing.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's like such a breeze to watch that it's not even funny how quick you can binge this. Like it could be like a couple days and you can binge it. But yeah, I'm hoping that people get to experience Korra and get to watch it. But I'm so glad that you did as well. My rewatch was a lot of fun. I got to relive all my favorite moments and my favorite characters and reestablish my ranking system of benders and who's the strongest and the weakest, which is a video that I actually kind of want to make. I have I have a top 10 list of each bending class, so that
like
I have
a tier, like one of those tier list videos kind of thing. That'd be kind of fun, but like with benders, you could even do it with Avatar and Korra, kind of mix them together. That'd be kind of fun.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah. So I put like all time top 10 earthbenders, top 10 firebenders, and then top 10 waterbenders. And I have a lot of takes, man. I have a lot of takes, but obviously
Kyoshi better be on every single list. Avatar Kyoshi better be on every list.
Yeah, Kyoshi's great, man. I love Kyoshi. But let's get into season 4. So season 4, is significantly different than every season. I feel like every season is very different from each other. But we do have the core angle, which we don't even get into until episode 2, which is funny because in episode 1 of season 4,
well, the end of episode 1, you see where she's
yeah.
at, and then you kind of get a little bit of context right after that. So it's kind of like you're given a little taste, then all of a sudden, the next episode they kind of go more into it.
Yeah, exactly, which is kind of funny, right? Because it's like a good 20 minutes of no Korra in the first episode of season 4. But we do get to see where the rest of the world is at. So that's kind of where I want to start. I want to start with the elephant in the room, which is obviously Kuvira. Kuvira is the villain of season 4. We've had villains in each season. I feel like Korra is kind of designed with this villain segment in mind, which the idea of like reaching to the end, whether it's Amon, Unalaq, Zaheer, and then obviously Kuvira. But Kuvira presents some of the most dynamic stuff inside the Avatar world because it exactly mimics politics, right? And it mimics governments. It's the idea of what happens after a catastrophic event that Zaheer established, especially in Ba Sing Se, but the idea of him killing the Earth Queen. Now what, right?
So that power vacuum that's created, where it's like there's this system of governance, and all of a sudden the figurehead is gone, and all of a sudden you see the people sort of trying to seize control of the positioning of that government.
Exactly, and then from there, it only kind of makes sense that here comes this nationalistic kind of fascist type of approach, which prioritizes security over comfort. It prioritizes military over anything else. And that's kind of what Kuvira presents at the very beginning of this with, we see the bandits and we see her give her that ultimatum of like, follow me or basically die or basically be imprisoned. And Kuvira presents this aspect of this militaristic Earth Kingdom first, Earth Nation all the way. Who cares about all the rest? And eventually we dive into what happens in the Earth Nation under her rule, even if it's for a short time, when it comes to almost the purging of people that aren't Earthbenders. We see the internment camp that Bolin runs into with Varric.
Well, it's not just it's not Earthbenders. It's people that are not from the Earth Kingdom.
Correct.
Because they mention that when they run across those kind of escaped prisoners, that it's like, it doesn't matter if you're an Earthbender or not. If you're not from the Earth Nation, you're going to be sort of excised.
That's what I was referring to. Is essentially like anyone who's not an Earthbender, so Firebenders, Waterbenders, automatically basically put in prisons, and then eventually I think she was going to extradite them. So it's that idea of her targeting those people and trying to make this purification of the Earth Nation. The first thing I want to get to, Paul, and the first question I want to toss to you is that we've seen a lot of media talk about and present fascism, present nationalism. Obviously, Star Wars is one example. But I really like the way Korra did it in the sense that, especially in the first few episodes, the people of the Earth Nation love Kuvira. People cheer her on. People boo the king. People love her. And I was like, that's such an interesting way to put it, because you get to see that there is a lot of support for this kind of approach, even if it's the incorrect approach. What do you think of that aspect of it?
Well, I think it's interesting, too, because it's like, I think a lot of the reason that she is cheered is because the other option is this kind of big doofus that doesn't know what he's doing, and he's this silly kid who's not really prepared to lead. And I think especially in a time where the Earth Kingdom is such in the state of flux, I think that person who is that strong fist that's representing her people, I mean, it's kind of the same thing that happened with Hitler, it's like people were suffering. There was kind of some issues with national pride, and she comes in and fills that vacuum and feels like she's helping people out. But it's tough, though, because I think that the people we see a lot love her. But I think if you notice, there's hints that these small towns that she comes into, she seemingly helps, but then as soon as she disappears, things get really bad. And I think those people just don't really have voices in the Earth Kingdom. So I think that's why, or Earth Empire, I guess, ostensibly. But I think the reason that she is seemingly so adored is because the only people that she keeps around and props up are the people that are supporting her. So it's kind of a big echo chamber thing where she's building this group of supporters, and anyone else is not, there's the inner circle thing, but I think also like it's kind of like a middle circle where it's like the people that you can hear or see often are the people that are her supporters, and other people kind of get silenced, tossed off to the side a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of the idea. One of the scenes I'm referencing is mainly her speech when she decides to announce to the United Republic, that she's kind of in charge now and that she's not going to accept the Earth King. And everyone starts going crazy and starts cheering on, "We love you, Kuvira," and all that stuff. And you're right, it is kind of this echo chamber, but it kind of does describe kind of the effect of nationalism, right? Because nationalism within itself seems to be a very a positive thing. One of the things I really like about Korra as well, and the way they do it, is the fact that Bolin is on her side. Obviously, eventually he leaves, but the fact that we see one of our own, a beloved character, as goofy as he is, Bolin kind of joined Kuvira in this venture. I thought that was interesting as well. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think when I first saw it, I was really frustrated because I felt like Bolin was being kind of out of character and it seemed too naive. But I think on rewatch, you really discover that I think this was bound to happen eventually because Bolin is so gullible, like both in like a literal, like he falls for stupid jokes and people say, and, you know, lying to him all the time, but also like, I think he just buys into people so quickly. And it was only a matter of time before someone kind of utilized that and used it to their own advantage. And I think that's what you see with Kuvira is she paints this picture for Bolin, and he's not the kind of person that's going to interrogate something like that. Like if he sees something that sounds, looks, smells good, like he's just going to assume that it is as it's presented. And I think that's why Kuvira is so smart, is because she sees that opportunity in Bolin and she's able to exploit him. I mean, she uses him later on, you know, as like this diplomatic figure where it's like, well, if Bolin's supporting her, she can't be all bad kind of ideal. But I think it was bound to happen with Bolin just because that's the kind of person he is. He's not really someone that is very dubious many times, which is a pro as a friend, but also can be a con in terms of him being able to be exploited so easily.
Yeah, but I love that. That's pretty spot on. But the idea that also kind of represents people as a whole when reacting to this. One of my favorite things about Korra season 4 is the fact that it does reflect a lot of what we've seen in history. And you could even say what we see in present. When it comes to, like you said, the echo chamber, when it comes to the almost this fanaticism that happens with Kuvira happening with her followers. The fact that it comes in this easy to swallow pill and this sugar coated pill of like, hey, look, we're helping people, we're passing out food and stuff. And then you realize, obviously, towards the end, like if you don't accept it, then she probably will imprison you or toss you out of the country. So talk to me about that and how this reflects kind of real world history and real world politics.
I think it is also one of those cases, like you see in the world a lot of times, where it's like, this is bad, but also the alternative is not really that good either. Mm-hmm. Like when you look at the Earth Queen, the way that she ruled over the Earth Nation, that was also terrible and horrible. And it's like, and if you look at Prince Wu, he's like a total imbecile who has no relation to any regular person. He has no idea what anyone's life is like in sort of in the outer ring of the Earth King. Can you imagine him trying to relate to Mako's family, like living in that big packed house? Like he doesn't know what their life is like. So I think, again, it's a case of like she is definitely really bad and awful, but the other options are pretty bad too. So it's kind of almost hard to distinguish what really the worst version of that is until sort of Kuvira reaches her breaking point eventually. But it's like, I think at first it kind of seems like she's at least competent and the other options are not very competent, or they're being ruled by the other leaders. It seems like Raiko is kind of like shadow puppeting Prince Wu. You know, he's really the one that would ostensibly have been in charge of the Earth Nation had Prince Wu taken over. You know, they kind of talk about that, like he's not going to make any decisions. Like we're going to have people in place, but that just sounds like they're controlling him. So it's like you can totally see how, as an Earth Kingdom resident, you would think, oh, this woman who is from the Earth Kingdom, she's strong, she's a good fighter, she like fights for our people and fights for our independence. And I think that is why that appealed to them so early on, and that just snowballs and snowballs until it finally gets worse. You know, it's kind of hard to see the signs early on if you're not looking for them in the right place.
Yeah, and it kind of extends when she mentions the Earth Queen, and when she talks about how outdated that is. And it's this kind of idea of her referencing this hierarchical structure and how she's there to take down the corrupt system that was already in place and the outdated system that was in place, which is ironic, right? Because that's eventually how she considers herself. I mean, you can even say she becomes the Earth Queen in her own way. So it's that idea of like, I'm here to change things by taking out corrupt leaders, when in reality, it's like you're the most corrupt of them all. And all you're doing is presenting a different way of manipulating people, which is what she's good at.
And also, it's interesting. If you think about it, Kuvira and Killmonger from Black Panther have a lot in common. When you notice, she has that conversation with Su Yin where she's talking about how they're hiding in their separate palace and they're not sharing everything with the rest of the world. They're not protecting the rest of the Earth Kingdom. They're kind of keeping in their safe bubble. And they're very advanced technologically. You see that the people in Zaofu are way more advanced than the rest of the Earth Kingdom, and they're not really sharing that with the rest of the Earth Kingdom citizens. So I think you see that Kuvira and Killmonger kind of come from that same place of like, we have it so good, why don't we share that with all of our people instead of just keeping it to ourselves and being safe and not risking it for other people who might need it just as much as we do.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because I think a lot about leadership, right? And if I'm being honest, man, one of my favorite characters in Korra, I was thinking about it just now. I was like, man, it's so hard to pick a favorite, right? But one of my favorites, if top 3, top 2, if not one, would be Su Yin. I love Su Yin. To me, Su Yin is like the perfect like combination of all of Top's good things, the talent, the metal bending, all that stuff, but also this idea of leadership and how she was presented with being the savior of the Earth Kingdom, and how she turned it down because she didn't see that as an opportunity to lead, but instead as an opportunity, like you said, the power vacuum, where she would just be elevated to a point where she didn't want to be elevated to, considering that she's a Befong, considering that she literally built the most technologically advanced city on the planet. She has a lot of power, so she felt like, man, I would become way too powerful. I don't know if I could handle that. And Kuvira saw that as like, I'm built for this. Like, this is what I was trained for by Su Yin. I have to take leadership and I have to share our power and share our resources.
That's true, but I think also you see that also is a bit of a mistake on her part, because if she doesn't take that position, there's someone that comes along and who will probably be less competent and less morally structured. And I think that the show kind of does push back on the idea that what she did was right, just because, like, yes, it's true, like she did it for the right reasons, but I think she also didn't consider the alternative possibilities of what would happen if she didn't accept it, and she did kind of play it safe. And she's definitely way more family focused. Like, I totally understand her perspective. She wants to care for her kids and her husband and her people in Zaofu. But I think that her not accepting that position kind of led to someone else taking that spot, someone else who didn't have the same moral fiber that she does. And it leads to a dictator taking place where maybe, I don't know if she would have been the best leader, but I don't think that she would have been Kuvira level kind of evil, So it's hard to really say if what she did was right or not, because the intentions are there, but does that ultimately matter to the rest of the people? Because the results are, kind of rough.
It's so interesting, right? Because you're right. Considering that she probably did make a mistake, considering she tried to kill Kuvira like 4 episodes later. So, I mean, that makes sense as far as like, man, I made a mistake. I'm going to try and kill her. Yeah. But it's also the idea of her already being an established leader with Zaofu. She's a natural leader, right? I mean, the idea that she literally is an art director, a musical theater director too, like when she's doing that art performance when we first meet her. So she's like a leader in different aspects, leader of her family, because we can tell that her husband isn't necessarily the one in charge in this season as well.
He's a wet blanket. He is a total wet blanket.
So she's like a leader of a city, built her own city, leader of a family, like an artist, like a warrior. She's one of the best earthbenders ever. So it's all these things that Su Yin has that she passes on to Kuvira, right? But she sees the power as way too much, considering that she already is a Befong, the most technologically advanced city in the world. It presents the aspect of like, what is too much power, considering that Su Yin, like even Tenzin says it. It's like you have the Befong name, like you're a Toph's daughter, you're a legend. You would be like she would have been like a goddess to her people. So I think it's interesting that Kuvira took that training and kind of established herself, which presents the idea of what is the best way to rule. And obviously by the end, we see Prince Wu say that we're just going to be independent and then we're going to have a voting structure.
Elected leaders.
So we're making a democracy, essentially, is what he said, through the states in the Earth Kingdom. Because the Earth Kingdom is the biggest one, I think, in the by far.
The Avatar world. Not even close. Yeah.
So it presents that idea of like individual locations establishing one leadership. It implies the United States, right?
It's more of a republic than a straight democracy. But yeah, I know what you're saying. I think it's interesting that you talk about how Kuvira learn these things from Su Yin, and she's the first villain that was introduced in the season before she even became the villain. Like all the other villains kind of came out of nowhere. I think part of that is also the way that the show was structured at Nickelodeon. They didn't know they would get a next season after this or a season after this, so it's hard to kind of plant seeds. But this is where, you know, she's in, I think, 2 episodes of season 3, and she's even named in, I want to say either the finale or the second to last episode, where I think once her character was named, I think that kind of tells you, ooh, like she's going to be someone that matters eventually. The fact that they went out of their way to give her a name, the fact that she's voiced by Zelda Williams, Robin Williams' daughter, like, which is a really cool kind of thing.
Great voice too. Yeah,
I think it's super fascinating that she does come from the world, and she comes as an ally initially of one of the big leaders kind of season 3, and then she kind of evolves from there. I think a big thing for that too is we haven't talked about this yet, but there's a 3-year time skip between season 3 and season 4. And when that first happened, I was super nervous because to me, the time skip is such a difficult device to pull off. I think that you see something like Young Justice really struggle with how to use that device narratively. Example. Yeah. And I think that creates some weird tension where sometimes it's hard to make characters feel like they've grown. I think they do a great job with Asami, especially. Like she looks different, she sounds different. Yeah. Her character is a lot different. City.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of other characters struggle with cementing them as sort of characters with growth. I think Korra and Asami are sort of the best examples of, like, you see where they were point A and point B. But the time skip, it was a risky move, and I think it largely paid off. But like that is a device that I think can be tough to nail, and especially in something like animation where it's you trying to maintain the characters, but also like give them a little bit of aging. Where, you know, if you're filming a live action movie, the actors will have just aged, so you can just be like, yeah, it's been 3 years, like, of course. But I think with this, it's a little tougher to kind of balance that, and I think they do a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, I mean, it establishes the idea that Kuvira saved Tonrock, right? That's a big deal to Korra. That's a big deal narratively when it comes to her being some sort of figure of hope. And then she comes back as this antagonist towards Korra. She even uses that as a bargaining tool towards Korra when she says, I saved your father. Like, you know, I'm not a bad person. Yeah. How could I be a bad person if I saved your dad? Which they established in season 3, which I thought was really well done. I love the way they established season 3's Su Yin, Zhao Fu, the metal bending clan, like all that stuff, to eventually bring it back in season 4 and just really dive into it with Toph. We get the return of Toph. I definitely want to get your reaction to that. Just the idea of Toph coming back was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because, like, you know, you kind of thought that maybe she might come back because all the other characters were either mentioned as being dead or they've appeared already. So you kind of had a feeling that she might come back, but it's so poetic. You know, obviously, like, the first time you ever see Toph in Avatar is in the swamp when Aang sees her in the vision, and the fact that she goes on to live there, I think is quite interesting. She comes back for her family, even though she's kind of been this hermit for so many years. She's like very clearly kind of a Yoda analog, you know, when Korra goes to the swamp to, you know, this old hermit, kind of weird leader who's got these strange methods of teaching. And I think they use her in an interesting way that's so different. Like, she's just so not the character that we know from Avatar, which is kind of obviously a good departure because you wouldn't want the same thing over and over again. That was a pretty interesting choice to bring someone like Toph back so late. Like, you would think they would have mentioned her or something in seasons 1 or 2 as still being around, but there's a lot of ambiguity. And then here she obviously comes back and plays a bigger role. Although I'm glad she didn't play too big of a role. Like, she kind of stepped in for a little bit and then stepped back when it was her family was kind of dealt with. So I'm glad it wasn't too much of her kind of like, you know, them kind of doing the fan service thing where they're having her be, you know, defeating every enemy and stuff like that. Like, she's good, but they use her in a small sample enough, I think, to not be too much.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been kind of a lot, right, if Toph comes in at the end of the finale and saves the world and she fights Kuvira in this epic metal bending battle. Yeah, exactly. It would have been too much. But yeah, the fact that she comes back is definitely an amazing portion. I want to talk about the swamp a little bit. I don't even know why I want to talk about it, but I want to talk about it. The idea that it represents nature, a spiritual refuge for the spirit world and for the regular human world. And that's where Korra needs to literally face her demons and face herself, take the poison out of herself. And kind of the idea of Korra finding refuge in this location. I like that the little puppy spirit leads her there, which implies that there's a reason for her to be there. I don't know, man. There's something about the idea of, and Korra and Avatar have always talked about the idea of nature kind of being an active participant in world events and actively helping Korra, and this swamp representing this purification of like pure nature that obviously Kuvira kind of destroys when she starts taking the spirit vines. But talk to me about the swamp and what that represents when it comes to this spiritual refuge for Korra to face her demons and come to herself.
Well, I think you get a little taste of that in season 2 when Rock is telling the whole story about how he destroyed the magic forest and what that caused all the spirits to attack them. And I think the seeds are planted there. Even in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Aang is trapped in the swamp and he finally connects with the vines and he's able to kind of see the world in such a different way. It's an interesting like sort of locale as this central spiritual figure, because it's, they have all these maps of all the cities, and then all of a sudden it's this swamp that nobody really knows much about. They haven't really explored too much. I mean, that's kind of why Toph's able to live there, because nobody really goes there. And the fact that it's so central is interesting because it's this untapped ground for so many people, a place that people have never even thought to explore. And that is kind of like the biggest link to the spirit world, which is so important, obviously, in seasons 3 and 4.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we know where the spirit portals are, and the swamp is kind of like nowhere near it, and yet it's considered to be one of the most spiritual places on the planet. I kind of love that. I love the idea of this location being that.
Well, at the end, the spirit portals are near, because there's obviously a new spirit portal that is created in the swamp. Yeah,
exactly. But I want to talk about Korra now, because obviously after season 3, we end on Korra with that single tear and her in a wheelchair, which is already just this dramatic effect that we've never seen an Avatar like before. And we come back with her and we get her recap episode in the episode 2, Korra Alone, where we learn that she's been struggling to even learn how to walk again. And we learn that she's struggling with PTSD, which is part of the psychological effect on her, not just on her body, but on her psyche as well. Talk to me about the idea of bringing that in and seeing an Avatar try to come back from that.
Yeah, I think it's such a great exploration of post-traumatic stress. I think the fact that it's been 3 years, like there's the 3-year time jump, and she still is not, like, you see her like getting her butt kicked in these underground Earth Kingdom battles, and I think or I guess Republic City, but like Earth bending battles. But I think that it's really just so sad. I mean, even just the end of season 3, where she just looks so desolate, and she looks like she doesn't want to be around anyone. Like people are trying to give her this encouragement, and she's just kind of not having any of it. And it's just, it's more of a mental recovery than it is physical. I think you see that manifest eventually. And it's such a great metaphor when she gets the metal out of her, because it's like, it's this weight that she doesn't realize she's been carrying, but it's been weighing her down the entire time, which is the same thing as her past. She's been running from her past the entire time. She's never able to accept any of the things that have happened to her. Even in seasons 2, seasons 3, the events of the previous seasons, she would get these flashes and get really scared, and she would never really deal with them. I think this is finally a season where she had to deal with them. Otherwise, the world would have totally been in chaos. And I think that when you see her go and confront Zaheer, that's sort of her big kind of coming home, come to Jesus kind of moment, where she kind of lets go finally and accept. It's just so strange, because it's like all those conflicts, like they resolve themselves, even though like she wasn't necessarily solely responsible. Like they turned out for the better, but they still haunt her in these ways, just because, I guess, because she wasn't the one to really solo make those things happen, and she feels like as an Avatar she's kind of failed. And I think that's a great exploration of kind of the way that people internalize their past experiences, their past griefs, and she can't deal with it. Like she's unwilling to even confront them. As soon as she has the visions, she totally blacks out. Like she doesn't, she can't even face her the shadow version of her own self. So I think her full diving into that is what makes her character at the end so satisfying, because she's kind of been a little bit of an arrogant jerk even throughout the whole series, really. Like she's kind of been a little full of herself, a little selfish at times. But I think a lot of it's just because she's not dealt with her own issues from the past. And I think when she's finally able to do that, she can help other people, and she can feel like a more fully realized Avatar, and not just someone who has a lot of power but doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, and I love the way they explore it in both seasons 3 and 4, because they get into it a little bit in season 3, but eventually that comes into, like you said, the scene with Zaheer. I thought that was incredible, the idea of Zaheer coming back We see that incredible scene of the chains just floating up with him, and he's still able to fly like the way we saw in season 3. And the idea of him being the spiritual guide to Korra in that moment, and it's kind of funny, right? Because I think that's the biggest pitch that the creators wanted with Korra, especially in season 1. We get into that a lot, where they talk about how Korra is so spiritually disconnected, like absolutely no connections to the spirit world, spirit, anything, spiritual energy. She's so the opposite of Aang.
She's the anti-Aang, totally.
She's the anti-Aang.
Yeah.
And it's the complete opposite of Aang that I remember a lot of fans hated that. If I remember correctly, they hated it because they wanted that, oh, why isn't she like Aang? And it's like, that's not the point. That's kind of, well, actually, that is the point, to make her like not Aang. But then the idea of the villains being the ones who are way more spiritually connected, like Unalaq, and especially Zaheer, because I feel like Zaheer is very different than Unalaq in a way that his final intention isn't necessarily dark avatar level, and he's able to come back and kind of pass on that knowledge in this weird kind of like making up for the mistakes he made type of way. And it's also his responsibility of the power vacuum that he kind of created for the rise of Kuvira, because he mentions that. He's like, oh yeah, I've heard about her, ever since I did what I did when killing the Earth Queen and taking down the Ba Sing Se. Talk to me about that scene, because I think that's a really cool moment of Zaheer coming back.
Well, again, I think when we talk about Korra being the anti-Aang, I think that Kuvira is the anti-Zaheer, because Zaheer is such an agent of chaos, and he's such a man of the people, like total sort of he wants everything to be equal, and like she is the ultimate vision of order. She's very serious. She makes everyone get specific haircuts. There are uniforms. She's uniting a kingdom under one name, under one banner, under her own rule. And that's not what Zaheer wanted at all. Zaheer wanted to totally like destroy the established order of governance. And I think that's why he helps her. It's because Kuvira is like, more so than Korra, more so than anyone else, is everything that Zaheer was against. I think that's such an interesting thing to pit the two different villains against each other, because I mean it just shows you they're just people who are really misguided. And aside from Unalaq, the other 3 villains have all had specific intentions that they thought were good ultimately. Like they thought they were bringing, peace to the world in one way or another. Amon trying to bring equality to all the people and to non-benders. Zaheer taking the power structure away from sort of the privilege and bringing everyone down to the same level. And Kuvira just trying, I suppose, to just unite her kingdom and to not be hurt again the same way their kingdom has been in the past. So I think that having Zaheer and Kuvira be those opposites is what makes it believable that Zaheer would help. Because if it was just another villain that was kind of similar to him, you'd wonder, like, why would Zaheer help Korra? But in this situation, it's like, she is everything that he fought against.
Yeah, and the fact that he is the spiritual god, I love that he's one of the most spiritually connected people. Even in that scene, Korra says, like, how are you able to, go into the spirit world in such an isolated place? It's not very spirity, is what she says.
Yeah.
But he obviously is able to tap into that and lead her into the spirit world, play out literally like a movie, the scene where he fights against her in the season 3 finale, and he tells her to just power through it and make it to the other side. Which eventually she does. I think that scene's very interesting, and you're totally right. Like, it really is because of Kuvira. He's literally like, "Oh, she's got to go, man. Like, this is literally what I did not want, and it happened kind of because of me." So I love the idea of him just having that moment, even though he's still bound by chains and even though he's still imprisoned. But if you really think about it, he's the only survivor of his team. Like Zaheer lost his girl, and then he lost his other 2 homies. His entire lineup is pretty much out. So he's the only one left. So I love the idea of him kind of leading that, trying to correct himself in a certain way. I thought that was really well done. But eventually, once Korra is able to power through that and to get past that, we see the way technology is used, especially towards the finale. Once we start to reach the finale with Asami and Varric, when it comes to stopping Kuvira, but also with the idea of, weapons of mass destruction. I guess that's the best way to put it when it comes to the spirit vines. The idea of how Kuvira is using this mirror of nuclear power, right? That's kind of what the vines represent, of her having this ultimate super powered weapon that can stop anything. Therefore, she can impose her will on the rest of the world, and therefore she can keep everyone out when she says, "Don't go near our borders." Talk to me about that and how that's kind of another reflection into real world events.
Well, it's the ultimate sort of industrialist idea, because she literally cuts down the spiritual forest to power her nuclear weapon. So it's like the ultimate double whammy of, like, not only is she creating these super weapons, but also she's using the spiritual center of the world as sort of the fuel for those weapons. And it's like, Varric, obviously, like, as this kind of genius level intellect, made a big mistake helping her out. He's the one that designed the whole thing, and it really wouldn't be possible without him. And she just utilizes that to her advantage and creates this ultimate. And then she creates a Jaeger from Pacific Rim at the end with a giant mech that she has.
What'd you think of that? Because a lot of people hated that. They're like, really? A mech?
I thought it was a bit much. I understand the idea of, like, it creating this idea of physical conflict, and it's hard, it being platinum, they can't bend it. Mm-hmm. It did seem like a bit much of kind of a workaround to make it difficult for so many, because there's so many powerful people on Korra's side. And it would be hard to justify them having so much trouble. But it is crazy that they built that whole thing, and, like, Julie didn't even know about it, and she was, like, in the inner circle. That's, like, insane that they built this entire giant mech. But that's what Batar Jr. is there for. He's kind of the engineer. He's the reason that he built that entire thing, and then it ends up almost killing him, which is that's
great.
That's a tough scene. That's
a great scene. I love that scene. I love it, right? Because it kind of represents what season 1 represented, which is the idea of technology catching up with the Bender's powers, especially with Sato and especially with Asami and the Equalist glove and the idea of, like, it started with chi blocking, right? Because that's what made Ty Lee so cool, was the idea that she can keep up with any Bender. She can almost stop any Bender. She was even more powerful than almost any Bender, if you really think about it, considering that she can stop their bending, which is what makes them powerful. So it started with that, and then it moved on to the Equalist glove, the mech suits, all the idea of technology now being at a point where you can keep up with Benders and even overcome some Benders. Where if you think about it, add a couple more years, it's going to be to a point where now even the strongest Bender on the planet, the Avatar, can't keep up with the ultimate technologically advanced machine ever, which is Kuvira's super mech. I think it's Colossal is what they call it. Suit. Yeah. So I think that's the idea of what they were trying to get to, which is kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about it, the next Avatar and the next Avatar, if they do, because there's a few rumors that they might bring back an animated show, would probably run into this problem even more, considering they would be closer to our era of technology. And when it comes to weapons there, it'd be even more fascinating to think what they can come up with to fight Benders, right? Because that's the idea of what Amon did in season 1.
It's tough, though, because I think that a lot of the most interesting sort of Bender versus technology conflict has been covered in the show. So I think if technology, progresses too much past where we are now, I almost wonder if Benders would even really be that important. And that feels like that is a different kind of show, because the show is so spiritual at its core that I think making it about, like, primarily about technology is kind of like diverging from kind of the main interest of what the show wants to be about. Mm-hmm. And I think that you kind of lose a little bit of that spiritualism. So I kind of hope that if there is a show, that it's not too far in the future to where there's, flying cars and all this crazy kind of technology. I think this is the kind of the farthest I would want to see the technology sort of pushing up against bending go, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Obviously, I still think Amon does it the best in season 1 when he starts to say, like you guys could literally throw fire in my face. Like, how is that equal? Yeah. In any way, that's ridiculous. Which is a really fair point considering non-benders, which is why I thought chi blocking was so cool, and the chi blockers presented that.
And then one other thing too that I think is cool is, so the show is obviously this hand-drawn 2D animation style, but all the robots are all CGI, and I think that creates this great sense of the uncanny. You feel like these robots don't belong in this world, and it feels like it's almost in a different universe. Where you see, like, the mech suits that Asami's father built. obviously the giant mech at the end. But a lot of those mechanical elements feel like they come from another place and they feel like they don't belong. And I think that's such a great touch. Like, I know part of it is just practical. It's really hard to 2D animate robots like that. But I think it's very similar. They did this on the Justice League Unlimited series as well, where like mechanical robots are made in this 3D CGI style, which just makes them feel totally stand out from the rest of the elements in the show, and it makes them kind of scarier. You know, like that you feel like the characters are up against something they're not prepared for, they don't understand, and that makes them kind of this big threat.
I love that you brought that up, man, because obviously you brought up Young Justice. Korra does it, but my favorite anime one of my favorite animes of all time, I have literally the poster behind me. They do that in Attack on Titan when it comes to the Colossal Titan, and the fact that they make him CG animated because he's supposed to be so like otherworldly huge. So when he meshes with the 3D animation, he seems to be almost like this godlike creature that is so enormous that you can't even fathom it. So it's in 3D CG animation, and it meshes with that 2D. And I love it because you're right. It really does make it scarier where you're like, what is it that we're facing? It's like so big. So I love that. It's really spot on. But yeah, eventually we get to that technologically advanced thing that Kuvira presents. Let's get to the final battle, man. Oh no, I wanted to touch on Asami because I really do like the idea of Papa Sato coming back, and him kind of talking to Asami. We get a little bit of that with them meeting back in prison. And then eventually he comes back in the finale, and the idea of these two brains coming together and passing down that lineage. I thought that was a sweet moment, man. And obviously it leads to the death of Mr. Sato in this really epic scene of him breaking into the mech. What did you think of him coming back and the idea of him trying to make up a relationship with Asami? Because I love those moments.
I think it's great. It's great mirroring when you look at the Zaheer situation, because it's both Asami and Korra are dealing with these people who are villains of past times, but they still have something to learn from them and they still have something to gain from them. And that's something that Toph talks a lot about when she talks to Korra, is you can always learn from sort of your enemies or villains' ideologies and their skill sets. And I think that Asami, in a more practical way, her father helps them find the solution to break into the mech. But also, it just in general, I think it's this great theme of Asami and Korra being more willing to accept and forgive their villains than someone like Lin, who held on to this grudge with her mother and her sister for years. And they weren't even like active villains. They were just like bad siblings / parents. So I think that it says a lot about who Asami and Korra are as people, that they're willing to sort of, to reach that hand, to extend that olive branch and to forgive. And that's something that's tough. I mean, even at the end, Korra forgives Kuvira, which is something that you would never expect a hero like this to do. Like it seems like she's this ultimate force of evil. She's done so much destruction and caused so much pain, but Korra knows that deep down, that's not the person that she is. And I think Asami sees the same thing in her father. She sees that regret, and she doesn't want to hold on to that for the rest of her life. She doesn't want to let his mistakes run her life. And so she forgives him. They start playing Pai Sho, and obviously like their relationship kind of mends. I think as soon as you get the whole situation of like them really like, accepting each other's love back in their lives, I think you kind of know he was dead. It's like, man, he came back, they reconciled. Of course he's going to have to die now. But I mean, it still was a very satisfying moment. He ejects her from the hummingbird robot, and that's a tough scene. Yeah,
it's a tough way to go, but he still went out like a boss, and obviously he still went out protecting his daughter, which again, it shows the idea of lineage, the idea of passing down to the next generation what you know and your mistakes, and teaching them everything when it comes to knowledge wise, which I think is why Asami's another, again, I'll put her in my top 3 favorite Legend of Korra characters. Obviously we get to the conclusion. I like that you touched on the conclusion of Korra forgiving Kuvira, because obviously we do get to that scene, but I still love that Kuvira is so stuck in her ways and so stubborn that even when all is lost and she loses the giant mech and she loses everything, she still kind of fights towards the end, that finds that blaster gun with the spirit vine in there and tries one last shot to try to kill Korra. And then when she's unable to do so, gets transported into the spirit world, realizes that Korra, I don't know, man. I'm so interested, because what do you think Kuvira's thought process is? Because she says, don't shoot on Korra, and she tells that command to her soldiers. her power is way beyond what I can imagine, I think is her exact quote. So she was raised with this idea of, if I'm the most powerful, there maybe I can accomplish something great. And that's what we see in her metal bending and her earth bending. We haven't even touched on that. The fact that Kuvira might be the greatest earthbender ever. Like, she is that good. So it's one of those things.
Well, I don't know. Toph might have something to say about that.
I don't know, man.
To quote her, she is the greatest earthbender in the world. Don't you forget it, Ace.
That's true. That's true. But Kuvira is, I'm telling you, man, it's up there. I would put her maybe right behind Toph, but I could see Kuvira being the best earthbender we've ever seen, besides maybe Toph. So that idea of like, I'm the most powerful, I got the most powerful suit, and then I got the most powerful spiritual power technology ever, and yet the Avatar still beat me. There's something here that I can't stop, no matter how hard I try. So what did you think of her kind of saying that and giving up?
It's really out of fear. I think that the reason she wanted to be so powerful is so that her people would never get hurt again. And she's so scared after what happened to the Earth Queen. Even what happened back when Aang was around, when Ba Sing Se was conquered by the Fire Nation. I think that the reason she wanted to be so powerful was so she could protect her people.
Yeah.
And she sees that Korra can protect her people better than she ever could and ever will hope to. When Korra, self-sacrifices, essentially what looks like self-sacrifice, when she steps in the way of that blast that was aimed directly at Kuvira. So, like, to me, it was just her acceptance that my people are in better hands with Korra than they ever will be with me. And it was hard for her to see that, because she felt like she was this all-powerful entity and she knew what was right. But I think that ultimately she accepts that she's not the person that should be around to protect her people, and she finally sort of lets in. And I think, again, Korra making that choice is also important. The fact that she sees that Korra is willing to do that for her, someone who's pretty much an enemy for her for the entire season, that kind of puts her at peace, I think, and allows her to sort of lay down her weapons, because they probably wouldn't have won the battle anyway. Like, even if those mechs kill Korra in the little circle, I think that they get cleaned up by the rest of the sort of the United Republic. So I think it was her just kind of letting loose this idea of herself as being the ultimate protector and sort of passing that on to Korra as it probably should be, since she's the Avatar.
Yeah, it's a great way to go out. Before we get to our best moments, because I want to finish up on our favorite moments of the season, any kind of quotes or moments that you want to touch on. I want to touch on literally the most one of the most relevant things when it comes to people discussing Korra, and we finally get to it in season 4, at least officially. And that's Korrasami. Obviously, you weren't here because you didn't see it live for the inception of that and the growth of that when it comes to the conversation around it on forums, at least the forums that I was in, because I
did know it was happening. I did know it was happening.
You did? Okay.
So, like, even though I wasn't watching the show actively, like, I knew that was a thing that people were talking about and was kind of being thrown out. And then when it happened, I remember that being sort of a big thing in culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously I was on the Avatar forums for years. This was old school. I know, this is crazy, right? So I remember these conversations that people were having. What did you think of that? Because I thought it was such a beautiful moment when they take the vacations to the spirit world, hold hands, and then we see them come together. Camera pans up, and obviously the end kind of thing. When it comes to, that's the series finale. That's how they chose to go out. What did you think of that decision, and what do you think of the idea of Korrasami itself?
I think it took some time for me to kind of come around to it, because I think that I was hung up on a lot of small details, but I think that what a statement it is for LGBT relationships in an animated medium, which is just something that before Legend of Korra was just not really a thing. Like, it was never an explicit thing that people were willing to explore. And I think that what that means is so much more important than, maybe it doesn't quite hit here or there. I think that it is, like, I would have liked to see that manifest a little more directly, but it's also tough because it's like, there are obviously going to be these limitations where, like, the creators have said they were lucky to even get what they got at the end, and there wasn't even like a kiss or anything like that. Like, I think if they tried to make it happen earlier on, they would have gotten shut down. So it's tough. There are these moments, on rewatch, I never noticed this, but when they have that reunion with Mako, Korra, and Asami in the restaurant, Asami compliments Korra on her new haircut, and Korra kind of blushes, and that's something I never really noticed before. And that's like, whoa, like, this is like an early indicator kind of thing. That's where it really was like, oh, this is maybe actually a thing. The fact that she only writes to Asami when she's gone. She doesn't write letters to Mako. She doesn't write letters to Bolin. that kind of planted the seeds a little bit early on. And I like the idea of them starting as people who are not interested in each other in a romantic sense, but kind of growing that over time, becoming friends, becoming closer, getting to know each other better, and having that love sort of foster itself. But I think it is tough. I think that, like, with it ending on that, it almost feels like it's peripherizing Mako and Bolin. I think it was always about the four of them, and I kind of like the ending being about just the two of them. Like, I don't love that, but also, like, it's such. I think the statement itself is so strong that it's almost hard to really criticize. I just feel like the way that it totally wraps up at the end gives a little bit of short shrift, especially to Bolin, who you don't even really see, but barely, kind of in the last couple of scenes, which was frustrating for me because he's one of my favorite characters. But
gotcha.
I think that overall, it works great as this bold step into a realm that people have been scared to kind of dive into before this, and it's like. I saw someone make this point, and I think it's interesting. And it's like, if Asami was a guy, would anyone even really question that they're together? You know, like if the same things had happened, if the compliment and the blush and the only writing letters to them had happened, and then they got together at the end, would anyone be like, oh, this doesn't really make sense? Like, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't, kind of things here or there where I would have liked to see the relationship kind of come to a head a little more slowly instead of just like hinted at, and then all of a sudden they're together. But I think that ultimately, like, the seeds are there, and I think to say that it's not set up is kind of denying the obvious in a lot of senses.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works. I think it works just because to me it leads to a conclusion where they're both in a situation together. They're stuck together. They're obviously writing to each other together. They find each other as confidants. And then at the very end, it's like this end of the world type of event where they say, let's go for it. Like, let's try something. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not even necessarily like, you're my girlfriend now. It's more like hey, let's dive into this vacation. Let's give it a go. Let's go into the spirit world and see what happens. And that's how I took it, more as like them. They're gonna like start going out and see what happens. It is one of those things though where it is the final thing you see of the entire show, and it might be the final thing most people see of these characters. So like there is gonna be a sense of finality. So even though like conceptually, yes, it is the sort of like, oh, we're just going on a date. Like this doesn't have to be a big thing. I think that ultimately it is a big thing just because that's how it wraps up. But also like I get what you're saying in terms of like it's really explicitly not them like they're not marrying each other, Sure. But it is kind of the last image we see of them. So that's why it is, I think, such an important and big momentous thing because, it might be the last time people ever see Korra or Asami. Yeah, I think it's funny because you mentioned marriage, and then I forgot about Julie and Varric who get married.
Hell yeah!
And you could argue that too, where it kind of came out of nowhere.
I think that was made a little kind of. You see Varric like kind of nervous to talk to her a little bit.
Sure,
like
but there's
he
like
clearly
maybe two moments. It's the same amount of moments as the Asami.
It is pretty similar. Yeah, if you think about it, that's true.
Yeah, where he's like, "Will you do the thing with me?" And I was like, "Oh, damn!" Like he went for it.
Yeah.
It's great, and obviously it works because it's much more comedic than necessarily the Korrasami thing.
By the way, speaking of comedic, it's funny. Varric, a man from the Water Tribe, married a woman with the last name Moon. Sokka would be very proud. Is all I have to say about that. How beautiful and poetic is that?
That's amazing. Yeah, obviously. The whole Varric and Julie thing is classic. I was gonna say my last thing on Korrasami is like, bro, you can't blame Korra though. Asami is like a super genius, like super dark, long black hair, green eyes.
Like, her in the dress at the end, like Korra just got kind of lost.
Korra is like,
I don't blame her.
She's like, what can I do right now?
It's honestly more weird that like. Bolin or like other people. I mean, I guess Prince Wu is, but that more people are not like gushing over because Asami is kind of this perfect ideal of like what anyone would want someone like that to be, in all aspects.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous how much
she's rich, like she's smart, she's
smart, martial artist.
Yeah, it's great.
Kind. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous how incredible Asami is. Let's finish up with our favorite moments, man. Any scene or favorite moments that you want to touch upon when it comes to season 4?
I think what I love, and it's kind of a smaller moment, is when Korra is with Toph and finally Toph agrees to kind of help her out. The fact that it's Korra that bends the metal out of herself, I think that is such a beautiful statement about she has to do this on her own. She has to take that step, and it's her self-realization, and it's her like accepting her love for herself and accepting her past mistakes and moving on and having this ability to do things on her own, to not always rely on other people. And I think that is such a beautiful character moment for Korra, to bring her whole arc full circle. She's fighting in those earthbending fights that kind of feels like a form of self-harm almost. Like she's not dodging any of the rocks, and it just kind of seems like she's just doing it to do it. And I think that finally coming to a head with her taking the step to move forward on her own, I think is such a beautiful statement about her as a character.
Yeah, that's a great moment, man. Absolutely. One that I want to touch on, and it's one that I've been waiting to hit on for a little bit. One of my favorite episodes, probably my favorite episode of the season, if I'm being honest, is Operation Befong. Because obviously we see the Befong family kind of have this facing off moment where they have to kind of come to a realization of who they are as a family, with Lin and Toph, and obviously Su Yin with the rest of her family. And Opal too, because Opal is an airbender who just kind of comes in with Juicy. Shout out to Juicy, the best sky bison there is. Him and Lefty are the two best. But them kind of coming together, and I love all the aspects of their power, right? Because the Befongs are like legit, like the most powerful bending family ever. Like it's kind of ridiculous how powerful they are when it comes to the genius of Batar, the power of Su Yin, Opal and Airbender, Wei and Wing, who are like athlete prodigies who are incredible, and Lin as well. I mean, Lin is the chief of police, and then kind of having this moment of coming together. So that episode and the fight between Su Yin and Kuvira.
Yes, that's one of my favorites too. Actually, yeah, it's really creative.
It's so cool. It's so incredible because it shows
how Su Yin makes that armor just out of a random panel, like on the side of the gun, and it's all this. Yeah,
but the fact that she turns around, like she goes like this, and it turns around, the armor just comes on.
Yeah.
And then she turns back around and like pulls a staff out of midair and just pulls a staff. And I was like, oh my God, Su Yin's so cool. Su Yin's my favorite, and I think she is one of the best earthbenders ever too. I honestly, all right, I'll do right now a little taste. My top three is probably Toph, Su Yin, and Kuvira. But I would, if you guys want to mix up and say which one is up there, I'll give you guys a tease when it comes to my earthbender.
Not the 5 earthbenders from the live action movie who like went like this for 10 minutes to move a rock 5 feet. I think those guys are so powerful.
Not even like it was like a rock the size of like my phone.
Yeah. But it's funny, they're doing like all these moves, and it's like
yeah. Oh, it was so bad. But yeah, that fight scene is so cool because you realize like, oh, Su Yin trained Kuvira, and yet she's like having this upper hand with her, and obviously she eventually defeats her after like it's a 30-second fight, and yet it's so cool and so well animated, and you can tell like they're almost evenly matched, but Kuvira might have a slight upper hand. So that's one of my favorite moments and fight scenes in all of Legend of Korra. I think that was really cool. Anything else before we take off, man? Any final words on Korra?
I mean, it's one of my favorite shows ever. Like on this recent rewatch, like I used to kind of think that there were, some seasons I didn't like as much, but I honestly think that every season is actually pretty terrific. And I think, especially when you watch the whole thing as a whole, it comes together so well thematically that it's so satisfying. I mean, I just want to give credit to the voice cast, which is amazing. Janora is kind of sidelined in this, but I love Kiernan Shipka's performance as Janora. She, an actress probably better known for being Sabrina on that Netflix show. But I mean, the fact that they got J.K. Simmons to be on all these episodes,
and the fact that he's one of the best. Tenzin is such a dynamic and complex character.
I got to give credit to Jeff Bennett, who voices the radio announcer, who does all the intros. That guy's voice is amazing. Like one of my favorite parts of every episode is the recap before the episode. The moment in season 1 where Amon's guys come into his booth and he's announcing, talking about how he's peeing his pants. That stuff kills me. So that's one of my favorite kind of more unheralded characters in the series. But it's like, yeah, I just want to give a lot of love to just the creative team. This is following it. Avatar: The Last Airbender is like a crazy, insane ask.
Yes.
And the fact that this is just about as good is crazy. That is a wild accomplishment.
It is, and I feel like a lot of people sleep on that fact. The fact that you are following this up, it is,
and it was so butchered. Like the way this was aired on Nickelodeon's website out of order for 2 full seasons is such a travesty. Because this could have been such a big cultural thing. I think if this would have been pushed in the right way, And
If it
maybe
was,
maybe it finds new life now here on Netflix. I think hopefully it sort of gains that bigger audience, and it's just such a terrific show that I think gets overlooked. I mean, people boil it down to, there's that. A lot of people are just like, there's that weird gay thing at the end, right? When it's like it's so much deeper and more thematic than that, and it's got so many different levels, and it's really like this show is more thematically dense than Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think Avatar is executed a little sharper. It's got a little better consolidation of its ideas, but I think that this show is way more ambitious, and it's tackling bigger themes, and it's tackling different subject matter that Avatar just could never really get into. This is a more kind of teen, slightly more adult skewing show. And it just goes places that other shows, especially of this kind, just don't. And I think it's such an incredible ride.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's so many things that I would echo everything you said, obviously, but I always describe it as like the perfect blend of these adult themes, and yet it's still accessible to a younger audience if you want to show it to like a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a however little kid, that they can get a glimpse into these very complex structures and themes that are happening in the real world, whether it's in history or whether it's in current events. Get a lesson, get a theme, get a message that is very powerful and that resonates, but at the same time, be that incredibly well animated and well written show. That's the best way to describe it. It's very well written, very well plotted out, especially the 3 and 4. I think 3 and 4 is so
because
well
they're done together, so you could kind of
Yeah.
weave the themes in more instead of having to be like, well, are we going to get another season or not?
Yes.
The fact that the show has the character of Milo and also Zaheer, like those are characters that feel like they shouldn't exist on the same show, but it totally works.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the perfect example, right? Because you are able to blend those things that don't seem possible, but they do it so well when it comes to that. And that's why I feel like the accessibility of it is so wide, which is why I think Netflix realized that. And they're like, this could be our, like I talked about this on one of my first cut live streams. Like this could be our Star Wars. This could be our Harry Potter.
Our Lord of the Rings.
Our Lord of the Rings. Like this has like that wide appeal, 4-quadrant, everything you need to make a crazy live action, super popular type franchise, which is why I think they're trying to do. Obviously, fingers crossed when it comes to anything live action.
It's just tough when the two creators are not involved with that. It's just tough.
The fact that they were involved and now they're not involved
that's even worse. Kind of, yeah.
Which is why I've always pitched the Legend of Korra live action, because I feel like this actually translates a little easier than Avatar, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons.
That budget would be so high, though. So high.
Well, that's
the bending plus the tech. I just think that's like.
That's why
that's like a hundreds of millions of dollars.
$300 million Irishman movie. I mean, they did it with Scorsese, so they could do a $250 million movie.
It's a tougher. I think Martin Scorsese's got more of a legacy, unfortunately, than The Legend of Korra. But I mean, I just hope that that the show is at least interesting. I don't expect it to be the same thing. I don't think it should be. That doesn't really make sense. But I hope that the Avatar show is a hit, and hopefully it brings more people to Korra. We'll see.
That's my thing, is like, as long as people get to see it and maybe they will want to watch the original, that's kind of the whole point. That's why I'm always kind of pro trying something instead of just being against it. But we'll see eventually when that comes out. Obviously, fingers crossed if they do anything else with Korra, or even fingers crossed if they do anything else with the animated Avatar world. We'll see when they announce it, or whether the creators are going to try and do something on their own. We'll have to wait and see and find out. But either way, guys, those are our thoughts on the season 4 of Legend of Korra. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. What is your favorite scene, favorite moment of this season? And now that we're kind of over, what is your favorite season altogether? You can let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you, Paul, for joining us, man. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Where can everyone find you?
I guess Letterboxd is kind of the main thing. If you want to see what movies I'm watching, what I think of them, just search my name, Paul Oyama, and I'm also on Twitter. Every now and then, Paul_Oyama, PAUL_OYAMA. So yeah, just find me around there talking movies and sports and other things.
There you go, guys. Alrighty, guys, for the First Cut crew, I am Andres. That was Paul Oyama, and we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh.